They didn't come from the streets. They came from inside a jail cell. A group of white inmates locked up in Georgia built something deadly, something big. They called themselves the Ghostface Gangsters, and before anyone could stop them, they were running the meth game all over the state. Phones smuggled into prison, drugs hidden in cabbages, drones flying in contraband. These guys weren't just dangerous, they were organized. Green and white were their colors, but the damage they caused ran red. And the craziest part? Most of it happened from behind bars. Join us as we uncover the gang that flooded Georgia with meth, starting from the very beginning of their journey. Georgia's gang problem didn't just pop up overnight. Over the years, especially in the last decade, the number of gangs has grown fast, and most of them are all about one thing: moving drugs. Even downtown Atlanta has made national news because of how deep the gang ties run. Shows like Gangland and Drugs Inc. put the spotlight on the violence and drug war happening right in the heart of the South. But the Ghostface Gangsters have stood out from the rest. They are an all-white, prison-born crew that flipped the usual script. They are one of the deadliest and fastest-growing white prison gangs in Georgia. Born inside jail walls and raised on the streets, this gang wasn't just about tattoos and tough talk. They were killers, drug dealers, and criminals who took pride in breaking the rules, even if it meant gunning down cops. While most gangs start on the streets and end up behind bars, Ghostface started inside Cobb County Jail and made their way out to the streets. And when they touched the streets, they brought hell with them. What makes them different ain't just their origin. These dudes run tight. They've got hard rules, strict structure, and zero tolerance for disrespect. And they don't play around when it comes to business. Their main hustle is meth. Not a few grams, kilos. In just 2 months, they pushed over 50 kilos of meth across Georgia. That's not a small-time move. Law enforcement says the Ghostface Gangsters work like a well-oiled machine, sending meth from their prison base straight into Georgia's neighborhoods. And this wasn't just a side hustle, it was a full-blown operation, carried out with violence, threats, and white supremacist loyalty. As one officer said, the Ghostface Gangsters have systematically worked to flood the communities of Georgia with dangerous drugs. From a jail cell to statewide power, they didn't just join the drug game, they tried to run it. The story starts in the early 2000s inside Cobb County Jail, where 3 inmates, Jeffrey Barossa, David Powell, and Joseph Props, decided to form a gang. What started as a small clique behind bars blew up into a violent empire with around 5,000 members across Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. They called themselves Ghostface Gangsters, and they lived by a set of rules written in gang literature, enforced by beatings, stabbings, and even executions. Members used the alphanumerical code 767, representing the letters GFG for Ghostface Gangsters. These boys weren't just pushing meth, oxy, and weed. They were organizing murder hits, kidnappings, and targeted ambushes on law enforcement. One gang member shot a guy in the eye over a drug deal. Another stabbed someone in the neck and back for breaking gang rules. In the craziest show of power, they murdered 3 officers, including 2 corrections staff and 1 sheriff's detective. They don't just operate in prison, they operate in our neighborhoods, said U.S. Attorney B.J. Pack. Most of these gangsters were already locked up, but that didn't stop them. They used contraband cell phones to run the streets from behind bars, setting up video calls, passing drug orders, and plotting hits like CEOs of a criminal empire. Officers even found phones hidden in cabbages, dropped by drones with GPS precision. The gang had a whole chain of command, capos, lieutenants, enforcers, even so-called violators, whose job was to punish members who messed up. And yes, they cut off tattoos of those who disrespected the code. These dudes didn't care about race either. They were mostly white, but some were okay recruiting black members, others weren't. That's how twisted and chaotic the Ghostface world was. When you see that green and white flying on the yard, you already know who's in the building. Ghostface Gangsters. These boys don't just claim colors, they live them. From their ink to their slang, every piece of their identity screams loyalty, fear, and power. One of the first things you'll spot is their hand sign, the infamous devil horns, always thrown with pride. That's their signal, a quiet warning that GFG is present. Their world is marked by symbols that carry serious weight. The seven-pointed star, the number 7, and the full combo 767 are everywhere. From prison walls to tattoos. That code, it spells out GFG. You might also see a 7-pointed crown, ghosts, devils, and the tag VG23, short for Vanilla Gorilla 23. To them, that's not just graffiti, it's gang gospel. The language runs just as deep. GFG lives by sayings like 76 till the world splits, a reminder that this gang is forever. 7 Love means brotherhood. You'll hear face up or lace up thrown around too, either represent or step off. Then there's Crack or Cracka, a street nickname. Members call themselves fam, roll with the Boo Gang, and shout out Hoogie like a war cry. If you know, you know. A Georgia man who used to run with the Ghostface Gangsters spoke out. In his own words, he breaks down how he got in, what it was like inside, and how everything went down when gang life turned real. He calls himself Papa, repping the outskirts of Atlanta. Said he got tied in with Ghostface not for clout, but because you don't want to do time alone, especially when things get heated. For him, it wasn't just about protection. It was about feeling like he belonged to something bigger than himself. But he knew the moment you join, you're marked. You paint a red target on your back the second you get jumped in, he said. His first time locked up was for simple battery, but it wasn't the charge that had folks watching him. It was the name he'd already made for himself on the streets. From weekend lockups to full-blown prison time, he got deeper into the game. He landed at Coastal State Prison, where he was first introduced to the Ghostface Gangsters and thrown into that lockdown world. That's where gang life hit full force. Later, a brutal fight on the outside pulled him deeper into the system. It started with a birthday party, burnouts in the street, and some words exchanged with strangers. Minutes later, the party turned into a beatdown. I saw my boy getting jumped, so I ran out. I ain't thinking. I just reacted, he said. He grabbed what he could, a golf club, and swung hard. He hit a dude in the head so hard the club's head broke clean off. It bounced down the street. All I had left was a metal stick. That one swing sealed his fate. The victim? Turns out he was the son of a powerful county official. The case got buried fast, but Papa ended up doing time. While inside, he learned real quick that prison gangs play a different game. There's structure, mind games, and power plays. Now out for 3 years, he's kept his nose clean. But those war stories, they still echo. And the gang, they respected his choice to step away. But as he said, the road I was living on was certain death. I had to grow up. Behind bars and still running the streets, something they would often say about the Ghostface Gangsters. Back in March 2015, things started heating up for the Ghostface Gangsters and their meth empire when members of the crew got hit with a serious racketeering indictment. At the time, word on the streets and in the courtrooms was that the gang had over 400 members in Georgia alone. Their main hustle? Pushing dope, meth, coke, heroin, you name it, they were in it. But it wasn't just street soldiers they were charging. Even folks like Patty Green, a grandmother locked up in the Newton County Detention Center, got dragged into the mix. She told WSB-TV, "I'm definitely not a racketeer, I'm not a criminal." But prosecutors weren't buying it. They said she was tight with the Ghostface crew. She eventually walked out of prison in November 2019, now on parole, but that didn't stop the storm that was coming. By May 2017, the feds had seen enough. They launched Operation Poltergeist, pulling up hard on 13 alleged Ghostface members and their homies all over Georgia. One of the wildest moments? A WSB TV reporter straight up asked the suspect mid-interview, "Are you a Ghostface gangster?" The man didn't flinch. "Nah, I'm retired now," he said. When asked if the gang really let you just walk away like that, he answered coolly, "Yeah, I've been a Ghostface for a long time." That alone said plenty. Once you're in for life, even if you claim you're out. But it didn't stop there. In December 2018, things exploded again with Operation Vanilla Gorilla. That's when the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed a massive grand jury takedown. Dozens of Ghostface members and their crew got slapped with indictments for trafficking meth, cocaine, heroin, carrying illegal guns, and even running fake money. The feds weren't playing around. They said, All 43 of the people charged had a combined 561 arrests. That's not a typo. 4 of them had over 10 felony convictions each. These weren't low-level runners. These were people who had lived this life for real. Then came the big one, the story that showed just how deep this gang was operating even from the inside. In Albany, Georgia, a Ghostface boss named Donald Jason Miles, better known on the streets as Crash or Cocho, was locked up in Valdosta State Prison when he pleaded guilty to running a massive meth operation, and he wasn't alone. His right-hand man, Warren Dirty Courts, was sitting in Rutledge State Prison, doing time for other drug charges. But that didn't stop them. These two were running the show from behind bars like they were still out on the block. They weren't moving little bags either. This was about kilos of meth. According to court documents, they pushed over 50 kilos in just 2 months. That's heavy weight. And they had people on the outside doing their dirty work. One of those people was Keely Nicole Wallace, a 34-year-old from Covington. She played the role of the courier, moving meth from a Mexico-based plug in metro Atlanta all the way to buyers in southwest Georgia. Crash had brought her in, gave her the game, and then introduced her to Dirty. She admitted to making 10 to 15 runs each time, carrying around 250 grams of meth. That's nearly 4 kilos in total just from her. The feds had been watching closely. On September 12th, 2022, GBI agents made their move. Wallace pulled into the Motel 6 in Albany ready to drop off a package. Instead, she got hit. Agents took her down in the parking lot, and when they searched her, they found about 1,400 grams of meth and her cell phones. That was just the beginning. From there, they connected the dots. Text messages, phone calls, instructions, everything leading back to Miles and Courts, both calling shots from their prison cells. It got even more serious when the Georgia Department of Corrections searched their cells on September 16th. They found contraband phones, and once they got into them, it was game over. Messages showed Miles and Courts planning deals, giving orders, and staying in contact with their Mexican source. Wallace was just one soldier. Investigators said the two had recruited multiple couriers to keep the supply flowing. In one deal, Dirty told Wallace to grab a batch near Atlanta and meet a buyer at Walmart in Albany. But when the buyer ghosted her, Miles told her to drive back to Atlanta. The next day, Dirty called again. The buyer was ready now. Wallace drove back, but the cops were already waiting. That second trip to Motel 6 became her last. She was arrested, and the whole operation began to unravel. What's crazy is that both Miles and Courts had rap sheets longer than a CVS receipt. At the time, Miles was already doing time for armed robbery, hijacking a car, aggravated assault, and multiple drug and gun charges in Fulton, Gwinnett, and Chatham counties. Courts had just been convicted in October 2021 for pushing meth in Cobb County. These weren't new players, they were certified vets in the game. On June 24th, 2025, the hammer finally dropped. Miles, aka Crash, got sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Courts, aka Dirty, got 20 years, and Wallace, the courier, was handed 40 months. There's no parole in federal prison. That means they're doing that time day for day. DEA agents, GBI, and U.S. attorneys didn't hold back. One statement read, "This career criminal continued his drug trafficking activities despite being incarcerated, demonstrating his complete and wanton disregard for the safety of our community." Another said, "The Ghostface Gangsters have systematically worked to flood the communities of Georgia with dangerous drugs. They made it clear they're not just fighting a gang, they're fighting a network with power on the streets and behind bars." This whole case was part of something even bigger, Operation Takeback America, a national mission to wipe out cartels, violent gangs, and drug rings like Ghostface. For law enforcement, this was more than just a win. It was a message. You can't run a gang empire from a prison cell without getting burned, but even with their leaders behind bars, one thing's for sure. The Ghostface Gangsters left a trail, and it's far from over. Founders of the Ghostface Gangsters were convicted as their empire of drugs, guns, and blood fell apart. It all started in the early 2000s inside a Georgia jail, where a whites-only prison gang called the Ghostface Gangsters, known on the inside as GFG, was born. This wasn't just any gang. These guys had structure, rules, a chain of command. At the top, the original 7 pillars. Every member, no matter how low on the totem pole, could trace their gang bloodline back to one of these founders. That's how tight this brotherhood was. And for over a decade, they ran a bloody business, pushing drugs, pulling triggers, and putting fear in anyone who got in the way. By 2022, the feds had caught up. A massive RICO case took down 25 Ghostface members and associates. Among them were 3 of the 7 original founders, the so-called pillars. These weren't small-time players. These were the guys who helped build GFG from the ground up. One of them, Jeffrey Allen Barassa, aka JB Babyface or Kid, pleaded guilty to racketeering. Another founder, David Gene Powell, aka Davo, got sentenced to just over 4 years in federal prison, and Joseph Props Jr., better known as JP, admitted to pushing at least half a kilo of meth and was hit with a 10-year prison sentence. The gang's violence wasn't limited to street shootouts or prison hits. These were men and women who didn't blink twice before pulling a gun or dropping a body. One Ghostface member, Victor VG Vic D. Jesus, carjacked a woman at gunpoint, threatened to kill her. And when the cops showed up, he shot at them. His co-defendant, Christopher Loco Marlowe, was right there riding shotgun. For that shootout, D. Jesus got 25 years, and Marlowe took 20. Then there's Richard Dirty Soseby, who earned his nickname the hard way. During a failed drug deal in 2016, he shot a man in the eye. That victim survived, but he lost his eye. Soseby got 22 years for that move. Another associate, Jennifer Barteski, got caught with meth and a gun. She ended up with 7 years behind bars. And it wasn't just the old heads getting caught up. Between 2019 and 2021, more GFG members like Cody Todd, Timothy Dino Wilkins, Jonathan Stubbs, and William Goodman got charged with racketeering. Some pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including drug trafficking. One of them, Kevin Sosa Soseby, tried to blast a cop 4 times during a chase. The officer swerved to dodge the bullets. Sosa didn't miss the courtroom, though. He got 24 years. The gang had women in the mix, too. Names like Samantha Miller, Genevieve Waits, Kaylee Brewer, Brittany Jones, and Haley Sizemore all pleaded guilty to moving product, meth, coke, marijuana, Xanax. If it sold, they pushed it. But one of the sickest moves in GFG history came from Christopher Davis. In 2019, during a gang punishment, he held down another member and used an axe to cut a ghost face tattoo off the man's chest. Another member, Stubbs, held the guy at gunpoint during the mutilation. That's the level of brutality these guys operated on. Punishment for disloyalty was blood. The list didn't end there. From Randall Chumley to Kelly Shiflett, more names fell one by one. Guns, drugs, violent charges. It was all part of the GFG playbook. Every arrest was a small crack in the empire, but what came next would shake the entire gang to its core. That crack turned into a collapse when a high-ranking shot caller named Donald Jason Miles, aka Crash, or Cocho, was caught running a full-blown meth empire from inside Valdosta State Prison. His right-hand man, Warren Dirty Courts, locked up at Rutledge State Prison, helped him funnel over 50 kilos of meth across Georgia in just 2 months. Their courier on the outside, Keely Wallace. She wasn't a gangbanger, but she was moving heavy weight like one. Between 10 and 15 runs, quarter keys each time. The trap started to fall apart on September 12, 2022. Wallace rolled into a Motel 6 parking lot in Albany, thinking she was meeting a buyer, but it was a setup. GBI agents were already watching. They popped her on the spot, finding 1,400 grams of meth and her cell phones. Those phones told the whole story. On September 16th, GDC officers raided the prison cells of both Miles and Courts. They found contraband phones and uncovered everything: messages, drop instructions, plugs from Mexico-based suppliers, and proof of dirty money being passed up the chain. Courts even gave a cut of his profits to Miles, proving Miles was the top dog. Every message showed who called the shots, how much dope was moved, and who was next in line. In court, Miles pleaded guilty and got 30 years in federal prison. Courts got 20 years, and Wallace ended up with 40 months. There's no parole in the federal system. That means they'll be sitting down for a long time. The DEA said it loud. This career criminal continued his drug trafficking activities despite being incarcerated, demonstrating his complete and wanton disregard for the safety of our community. Still, the most heartbreaking story connected to the Ghostface Gangsters didn't come from a dope deal gone wrong or a gang beef in a prison yard. It came from a quiet neighborhood in Coweta County. On February 11, 2020, 14-year-old Haley Adams was killed during a home invasion planned by Ghostface members. Prosecutors said that William Chevy Tyree, a high-ranking GFG member, gave the green light. He sent Justin ATL Ramsey, Kyle Chi-Town Conley, and Aubrey Bree Seven Brown to hit a house on Bethlehem Church Road. Brown's brother, Spencer Wicks, wasn't even in the gang, but he tagged along. Tyree told them to scare someone and grab any guns they found. They went in armed. Ramsey had an AK-47, the rest had handguns. Brown carried bags to haul the stolen weapons. They busted in and terrorized Haley's mother at gunpoint. When they realized the man they came for wasn't home, they tried to flee, but Haley had been hiding. The moment they turned to leave, this brave 14-year-old jumped out with a BB gun, trying to defend her family. Surveillance footage caught the flash from Ramsey's AK-47 as he fired shots. Haley didn't make it out alive. Chief Assistant DA Jep Bendinger said, "This scrappy kid runs to danger to defend her home and her mother, and it cost her her life." It was one of the most painful cases he'd ever handled. Haley's mother said she had just moved in with her the Friday before it happened. The young girl had dreams of becoming a Marine drill sergeant. Her family described her as sweet, silly, fearless, and full of life. After a long investigation, all 5 involved were sentenced. Ramsey got life with the possibility of parole, but not before 30 years. Tyree took 60 years, with 35 to serve without parole. Conley and Brown each got between 40 to 50 years, and Wicks, the only non-member, was handed 40 years. Every sentence matched their role in the crime and how much they helped with the case. Coweta County's DA, John Herbert Cranford Jr., put it plainly, "This case shows the harm that all street gangs do to our community. Violent gang members should be sent to prison for decades." And in the case of the Ghostface Gangsters, that's exactly what happened. From the jailhouse to the streets and back behind bars, the Ghostface Gangsters thought they were untouchable. But now, with their founders locked up, their soldiers falling, and their crimes laid bare for the world to see, their empire is crumbling. And the price for all the blood, the drugs, and the chaos, decades behind concrete walls. When Operation Vanilla Gorilla hit, the fall of the Ghostface Gangsters from inside the prison walls to the streets of Georgia began. It was one of the biggest takedowns the feds had pulled off in Georgia. They called it Operation Vanilla Gorilla. And when it dropped, over 40 people tied to the Ghostface Gangsters were hit with federal indictments. This wasn't just about drug deals on the street. These indictments exposed a full-blown white prison gang running a criminal empire from behind bars. Meth, heroin, guns, and violence, it was all part of the game. And the crew was moving heavy, no matter if they were locked up or walking free. The Ghostface Gangsters started small. They were born inside the Cobb County Jail in Georgia back in the late 90s or early 2000s. But like any strong set with something to prove, they didn't stay in one cell block. They spread. First to other counties, then outside the walls, and before long, they were in Tennessee and Alabama too. And with the feds estimating over 5,000 members, most of them locked up, it was clear this wasn't just a gang, it was a machine, and it was operating like clockwork. U.S. Attorney Bobby Christine didn't hold back when speaking on the indictments. "The gang started in prison, but has spread to the free world," he said. "It is my goal to end the gang where it started." The charges against these 43 men and women were serious: drug trafficking, firearms, racketeering, even murder. According to Christine, "We will target them, we will dismantle them." The heat on Ghostface had been building for years, But 2015 was when the narcotics conspiracy really caught fire. Investigators say that's when the crew locked in on large-scale dope runs. The feds had already dropped indictments on 23 members earlier that year for racketeering, wire fraud, carjackings, kidnappings, and even maiming. Then came 25 new counts for pushing drugs, carrying guns as felons, and unlawful distribution of controlled substances. One U.S. attorney put it real bluntly: the Ghostface Gangsters gang is very violent and their members will not hesitate to shoot at anyone. That wasn't just talk. These weren't corner hustlers. These were men who would turn guns on cops, slice off tattoos, or stab fellow members who crossed the line. Back in 2017, this same gang got linked to a deadly escape when 2 inmates killed 2 Georgia correctional officers and ran off from a prison transport bus. And it didn't stop there. Between 2018 and 2022, Ghostface Gangsters were accused of shooting at 12 officers in Georgia. 5 of those officers got hit, 3 died. That included 2 corrections officers and Detective Kristen Hearn of the Polk County Police Department. These weren't random acts. These were orders carried out with precision. The feds said it clearly: the gang flourished through recruitment, intimidation, and heinous crimes. Ghostface members weren't just going after rivals or cops. They were also enforcing their own gang rules through brutal punishments. In one incident, 2 members held down another Ghostface gangster and cut off his tattoo, a mark of shame for breaking code. Another time, a member got shot in the eye. Another was stabbed in the neck. All of it was gang-on-gang violence, discipline, Ghostface style. Inside the prisons, the gang had a tight setup. Their leadership ran deep. They had founding pillars, a seat at the table, and roles like state security, violator, structure board, education coordinator, living coordinator, comms, treasurer, legal coordinator, and even event coordinator. That's how structured the organization was, even behind bars. They weren't just pushing meth, they were holding meetings and planning strategies from cell blocks. And how did they keep that going? Contraband phones. The Georgia Department of Corrections said cell phones were their biggest weapon. With a phone, an inmate could run deals, give orders, or even join a video call. Phones were brought in through family, work details, or even produce trucks. One officer said, "We've had to start checking the cabbages. They've been holed out and are full of drugs and cell phones." But that's not even the wildest part. Drones were being used to drop off contraband straight into the yard. If an inmate turned on their phone, the drone could fly right to their location. One official said, "That drone can fly directly to the coordinates. So if an inmate has a phone and turns it on, they can have it fly to that person." That's how slick the operation was running. Then came the day federal agents dropped the hammer. 21 counts in a new indictment. Of the 23 named, only 3 weren't already in custody. Some were already in jail. Some were in prison. These weren't just new recruits getting popped. Many had multiple felonies, with 561 arrests between them. And 4 of them had more than 10 felony convictions each. Among the 43 indicted in Operation Vanilla Gorilla, officials highlighted one disturbing case. A suspected member had been caught after a baby's body was found in a freezer. When police finally found him in Florida, he took a man hostage and had to be shot 4 times by a SWAT team before being taken down. That story alone showed just how extreme and dangerous this crew had become. Despite being a white gang, some officials pushed back on labeling them strictly as white supremacists. The Anti-Defamation League says the group is mostly white supremacists, but not all members are racially motivated. One official put it like this: "They're not out burning crosses on people's lawns, they're out selling methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin, and pills." It's business over ideology, but that business is soaked in violence. Still, their white-only rule is no joke. Inside, only white inmates can be patched in. And on the outside, the gang stays tight to their own. Even though some claim they were open to recruiting black members, others in leadership shut that down. There's still division within the gang on how far to stretch those boundaries. And when you talk about women in GFG, there's a clear line too. They're almost never full members. Most are associates, used for drug runs, carrying phones, or sometimes helping with smuggling in contraband. As one attorney said, Some of the women looked like regular, normal women, but regular looks didn't mean they weren't tangled deep in this violent web. The DEA summed it up in one sentence. This organization distributed dangerous drugs that caused immeasurable damage to communities in the Southern District of Georgia. And by the time the dust settled from Operation Vanilla Gorilla, 41 of the 43 indicted were already in cuffs. The streets were watching, the prison yards were buzzing, and the Ghostface Gangsters, once a growing force, were suddenly facing their biggest enemy. The system that built them now aiming to bury them. Operation Kibo exposed Ghostface Gangsters as the fastest growing white gang in America. It started slow, like most crews do. But now, the Ghostface Gangsters are being called the fastest growing white gang in the country. And Georgia is right in the middle of it. These boys went from county jails to running dope, stacking charges, and making headlines from the streets of Augusta to prison cells deep inside the Georgia Department of Corrections. That's where Operation Kibo stepped in. A 3-year-long investigation that took down 77 members of the gang. Led by the Richmond County Sheriff's Office, this was the biggest gang bust in Georgia history. And it hit hard. Out of the 77 indicted, 56 were already in custody. The remaining 21 were still out there, but Sheriff Richard Roundtree made it clear they wouldn't be for long. His gang intelligence unit had been tracking GFG since January 2018, compiling dirt on 163 members and associates. They connected the gang to drug trafficking, gun violence, and organized crime across Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And it all started with someone trying to reach out to Ghostface for a favor to get out of the state safely. That was the tip that lit the fuse. These dudes were pushing heavy weight and causing serious problems. Roundtree said, "We know that attacking criminal organizations at the core is the most effective way to remove lawless street gang members from our society." And he wasn't alone. Governor Brian Kemp showed up at the press conference too. He backed the mission hard, reminding everyone that gangs are the driving force behind violent crime across our state. Back in 2019, Kemp had already launched a state anti-gang task force through the GBI. He knew what was coming. Gangs like GFG weren't just moving meth, they were pushing sex trafficking, guns, and violence. He called the Operation Kibo bust a historic day, but warned, these are very complex cases. The tough work is just starting. He made it clear Georgia wasn't going to let these gangs run wild. Just how bad had it gotten? Between July 2019 and June 2020, the GBI had been involved in 343 gang investigations. And by the next year, that number had jumped to 541. And in Richmond County, the streets were speaking. Gun violence was spiking, especially assaults with firearms. In the first half of 2021 alone, there were 133 aggravated assaults with guns, compared to 81 in 2020. The connection was obvious. Gangs and guns go hand in hand. Roundtree didn't sugarcoat it. If we can dismantle these gangs and bring them into custody like we did here, that's when we think we start to see the reduction on gun violence, he said. And he had a warning for anyone thinking about joining up. If you feel you must continue to engage in criminal activity in Richmond County, it's only a matter of time before your clock strikes midnight. That clock struck hard for William Bo Breland, a known Ghostface gangster who had already been banished from Spalding County due to his long rap sheet. But that didn't stop him. On January 22nd, he was spotted at a gas station with another felon, Douglas Briggs. Both were on active probation. When deputies rolled up, they took off in a car, leading cops on a 2-mile chase before crashing. Breland ran, fought a deputy, and got tased. He was caught with meth in his pocket again. Sheriff Darrell Dix had seen enough. He's not very fast and not very good at being a convicted gang-banging drug dealer, Dix said. Breland now faces more charges: probation violation, meth possession, distribution, and resisting arrest. But that wasn't all. In November, the Spalding County Sheriff's Office launched a raid on a property on Mangum Road, tied directly to the Ghostface Gangsters. It started with a tip about stolen dirt bikes, but deputies uncovered way more. Meth, stolen motorcycles, cars, firearms, and more gang ties. They arrested 6 people, including Michael Shane Pierce and Michael Tumlin, both living at the property. One woman, Haley McGuire, was still on the run. Sheriff Dix promised more charges were coming, especially under the Georgia Criminal Street Gang Act. And then there's John Anthony Doyle, a name you don't forget, a Ghostface member and a level 3 sex offender. Doyle had a rap sheet so thick it's hard to believe. In 2001, he was arrested for aggravated sodomy, child molestation, and sexual battery. That was just the beginning. Since then, he's been arrested 14 times with over 50 separate charges. Everything from probation violations to burglary, theft, drug charges, and failing to register as a sex offender. His latest arrest came in March when he was caught again for failing to register and obstructing officers. Let's not forget when Operation Ghostbusted caught up to chaos, the final Ghostface Gangster dragged back from Mexico in 2023. The name David Chaos Young had been floating around for over a year, not just in Georgia, but across the country. He was the last one left, the final fugitive from the massive federal investigation known as Operation Ghostbusted. And on a Saturday morning in Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico, the FBI finally tracked him down. The white supremacist gang member, who wore his Ghostface Gangsters tattoos like a badge of honor, was arrested and flown back to the U.S. after hiding out south of the border. Young was one of 76 people indicted in January 2023, part of the biggest drug conspiracy case in the history of Georgia's Southern District. The case exposed a gang-run network that operated deep inside Georgia's prison system and out into neighborhoods in Glynn County and beyond. They weren't just moving meth. This crew was trafficking fentanyl, heroin, alprazolam, and anything that could be cooked, cut, or sold. And it wasn't just GFG involved. Investigators tied the operation to Aryan Brotherhood, Bloods, and Gangster Disciples. Different gangs, same pipeline. Young's street name was Chaos, and that's exactly what he brought. He was charged with conspiracy to possess and distribute meth. But by the time his name hit the indictment, he was already gone. The feds issued a warrant for his arrest in December 2022, but he slipped out before they could put hands on him. He ended up featured on America's Most Wanted, and it was those tattoos that gave him away in Mexico. Now he's sitting behind bars again, and this time there's no more running. The man in charge of the operation, FBI Atlanta's Will Clark, made the message clear. Gangs that operate out of our prison systems not only bring drugs and violence into prison facilities, they also breed drug-fueled violence in our communities. The feds weren't just chasing one man. They were taking down a network built on dope, violence, and prison politics. When Operation Ghostbusted was first announced, it shook the state. It wasn't just another sweep. It was a deep, 2-year investigation led by the FBI Coastal Georgia Violent Gang Task Force. They teamed up with everyone: local cops, sheriff's offices, GBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, even county law from Telfair to Troitland. The conspiracy was massive, and every name on that indictment had one thing in common. They all had their hands in the Ghostface pipeline. The man sitting at the top was James Nesmith, believed to be the gang's leader. He and 6 others were sentenced in November, long before Young was caught. The rest of the 76 defendants, all convicted. Together, these individuals had over 250 felonies under their belts. And the drugs they moved? Investigators say they were linked to multiple overdose deaths. Acting U.S. Attorney Tara Lyons didn't mince words. Our community is demonstrably safer with these drug distributors off the streets. And when you break down the numbers, the damage they caused is hard to ignore. 50 of the defendants were high school dropouts. Many had survived multiple overdoses themselves, and all of them were deep in the game. Department of Corrections issued jumpsuits while setting up deals with phones smuggled into their cells. One of Young's closest co-defendants was Blake K. Screen, a 36-year-old from Brunswick. He didn't plead out like the others, he took it to trial. But it didn't go his way. He was convicted on fentanyl and meth trafficking charges, plus intent to distribute, and got slapped with a 100-month sentence. Young, on the other hand, took a plea, and still got 235 months. That's almost 20 years. No parole, no second chance. The charges weren't small time. The indictment accused the gang of building a drug empire inside and outside the wire. Members like Young and Screen were the middlemen, the dealers, the suppliers, the ones who made sure the product flowed from stash to street. Their orders came from inmates behind locked doors. Their soldiers were street runners, addicts, and sometimes even other gang affiliates. The investigation proved one thing loud and clear. Ghostface Gangsters were not just a prison gang anymore. They had become an organized drug syndicate, blending the worst of prison rules with street hustle. And they weren't shy about it. Supervisory agents described the operation as one of the most violent and coordinated in the state's history. They used burner phones, coded messages, and family connections to move product and keep the feds in the dark, at least for a while. The streets of Brunswick and Glynn County became ground zero. Residents didn't always see what was happening, but they felt it. The overdoses, the robberies, the gunshots, the turf battles, and all of it tied back to a pipeline that began inside a cell and ended in a body bag or a courtroom. Once the sweep began in late 2022, it was chaos. Cops moved in fast. Dozens arrested, some still in county lockup, some picked up at homes, others caught in cars filled with drugs, guns, and cash. But Young was already in the wind. For over a year, he stayed hidden, until that day in Mexico when the game finally caught up to him. Assistant U.S. Attorneys Jennifer Kirkland and E. Greg Galuli Jr. were the ones pushing this case for the Southern District. They worked under the OCD-TF program. That's the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, a group built to take down the highest level criminal groups in the country. OCD-TF doesn't waste time on street corners. They go after empires. And that's exactly what Operation Ghostbusted did. There were no flashy raids, no big press shows until the dust settled. But when the names dropped, the streets knew it was over. The gang had lost its leader, its runners, and finally, its fugitive face of chaos. David Young thought he could hide, but you can't outrun a list of charges like his. You can't outsmart a task force with that kind of reach. The Ghostface Gangsters had built something deadly. They mixed white supremacist ideology, prison loyalty, and drug profits into one dangerous crew. From Georgia prisons to Mexican safe houses, their reach was wide. But their fall was even bigger. With Young behind bars, Operation Ghostbusted officially came to an end. And what's left behind is a message. Run if you want, but the feds will find you. This gang doesn't just deal with the streets. They live behind bars. They build networks from inside prison walls and run operations like a corporation. According to the Georgia Department of Corrections, they use cell phones, video calls, and even drones to get contraband in and orders out. One officer said, "We've had to start checking the cabbage. They've been holed out and are full of drugs and cell phones." That's how deep it goes. The Ghostface Gangsters aren't just tattooed thugs yelling on the yard. They're strategic. They have ranks, roles, and leadership boards. There's a structure board, a violator, a communications coordinator, a treasurer, even a meeting coordinator. They handle recruitment, punishment, and business like it's a full-time job, and they don't tolerate disloyalty. Members who break the rules get shot, stabbed, or have their tattoos sliced off. There's no walking away easy. Even when the feds dropped major indictments, most of the suspects were already behind bars. Out of 23 people listed in one indictment, only 3 were free. That tells you all you need to know. Ghostface is a prison gang with street power, not the other way around. The violence tied to this gang is brutal. Members have been linked to murder, kidnapping, and attacks on law enforcement. In Georgia alone, they've been involved in shootouts with police, carjackings, and attempted murders of their own members. One gang member even stabbed another in the neck, and another was shot in the eye for violating gang rules. On the inside, GFG has built strong alliances. They're tight with the Gangster Disciples, Insane Gangster Disciples, and the Aryan Brotherhood of Georgia. These ties make them even more dangerous behind bars. There's also talk that GFG has beef with the Bloods in Georgia prisons, but no one's confirming that on record. Still, tensions run high when these sets cross paths. Despite all the chaos, the message from law enforcement remains clear. This war is far from over. As Governor Kemp said, the numbers here today are staggering, but it's only the beginning. The Ghostface Gangsters built their empire through fear, drugs, and blood. And now, every layer is being peeled back, one bust at a time. And that was the crew behind Georgia's meth explosion, Ghostface Gangsters, a gang born in jail, grown on the streets and still pulling strings from the inside. Do you think gangs like GFG are even more dangerous behind bars than they are on the streets? And can law enforcement ever really shut down a gang that moves like a full-blown organization?